Welcome to Jane Addams College of Social Work Training Institute for School Social Work Professionals. Our webinar today is Virtual Termination Amidst COVID-19, Guidance for School Social Work Interns and Field Instructors. I want to say at the onset that it really is important to point out that even though this presentation is geared towards school social work interns and their field instructors, there are applications to interns and
Don, I'm on the webinar now.
And practitioners in other agencies. So again, we really are so happy to have you today. So in terms of housekeeping, if you have questions, we'd like you to send those to the chat box and we'll answer those at the end of the presentation. So let's get started. Our objectives for today is to really provide some guidance for interns and field instructors. So let me put that into a context for this webinar. So as we near the end of the university's academic year, interns and field instructors start the process of terminating with their students, which traditionally occurs face-to-face. And of course, because of the current health crisis, that cannot occur.
Annette, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but yeah. I'm getting a lot of messages that say there's no sound.
Oh, okay, let's go back.
Can anyone hear sound out there? Oh, I see someone saying I can hear. Okay, lots of people can hear. So some people just didn't turn their audio on yet. Okay, go ahead. Sorry, Annette.
Okay, I'm sorry. So let me just start back in terms of setting the context for this meeting. I'd like to kind of start by providing a context for this webinar. As we near the end of the university's academic year, interns and field instructors start the process of terminating with students, which traditionally occur face-to-face. And because of the current health crisis, that cannot occur. So our objectives today are to, one, provide guidance to talk about the importance of termination, first of all, and then secondly, to provide guidance for virtual termination. And we know that interns are really concerned about securing a job. So we're going to give you some tips, which is an added bonus for how to prepare for the virtual job interview. So I'd like to present our presentation team. We have Gisela Grumbach from Governor State University, Eric Ingalls from Willowbrook High School. So I'm going to just pause for a moment and ask them to kind of share a little bit about themselves and their work. Gisela?
Hi, this is Gisela Grumbach. I'm an assistant professor at Governor State of social work at Governor State University. I teach pretty much across the practice courses, and I am more recently the coordinator for the school social work specialization program, and also am putting together a post-master's certificate program at Governor State for those who are pursuing their PEL. So welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Eric?
Oh, hi everybody. This is Eric Engel. I am the school social worker at Willowbrook High School, and I have been there for over a decade and been doing social work in schools for over 20 years. And currently I am terminating virtually with my 3 interns and hundreds of student clients in the school setting.
And I'm Annette Johnson. I am a clinical associate professor at the Jane Addams College of Social Work. I chair the Training Institute, which is doing this presentation today. And I also chair the School Social Work Specialization. So let me take a brief moment to share a little bit about the Training Institute before we jump into the presentation for today. We are now in our 11th year, and we really are excited and proud of that. The goal of the Institute started as a way to introduce practitioners who were working in the fields to cutting edge practices, evidence-based practices, and innovative practices. And I can certainly say today that this webinar really speaks to the whole notion of innovative and new practices. This is certainly a new area for many, many of us. So we are excited to be able to put this together in a relatively short period of time to share with you. So at this point, I'd like to turn it over to Eric, who's going to talk about termination with students in a traditional sense.
Okay, I'm going to jump right in here, and we're going to review the importance of termination with students. So in the school setting, similar to other social work services providing settings, you can advance the slide. Termination is a stage in the social work counseling process to review and plan. So first we review the timeline of a student's success over the 4 quarters of the school year. Then we reinforce future plans and maintain the social and emotional skills. Those skills are defined by the Illinois Social Emotional State Standards and goals that were worked on with the student in a group or individually or integrated into their broader school setting. So in terms of parallel process now, what we mean by that is it's how the supervisor terminates with the intern impacts as parallel process to how the intern is influenced, taught, and modeled how to terminate with the student clients. So there's a burden on us as school social workers that are supervisors of interns to model that in process with our students. And since it is difficult for all of us to say goodbye, avoiding it tends to seem easier. So due to Corona and sheltering in place, we could all easily intellectualize and rationalize why to not even attempt it. Yes, it is hard logistically, but it's mostly hard emotionally. So we must remind our interns and ourselves to terminate with student clients, supervisors, school staff, faculty, and bring closure to the overall experience. So traditional termination for school social work interns, we have to start with the end in mind. So, if we hadn't done it at the beginning of the year, it was sort of implied and probably talked about that this is a 1-year internship, time limited, just the duration of the school year. And then we have to reintroduce termination throughout the year. So now is that time of year between winter and spring break when the termination phase begins, the final quarter of the school year. So we want to have some kind of a timeline, reviewing the chronology of group events, review of skill progress, then some kind of final event. So go ahead and advance one more to the student termination traditional. So termination time needs feelings, expression, validation. So students could be experiencing anything from sadness to anger, denial, happiness, or some students are going to have even more intense feelings because some of them may have experienced trauma or abandonments or even stirs up losses and deaths. The process ultimately or optimally should take place over several sessions. Quarterly interactional progress report is how we want to review. If we have an IEP, those are a good model for regular review. Ending sessions should cover student self-reflection of growth and then affirmed by the intern leader. And then the last session should be a celebration and a goodbye.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about termination virtually. So I want to begin by just talking a little bit about considerations, ethical consideration and confidentiality. So it's really important to consider both of these issues. So first of all, we encourage you to really follow your district's current policy regarding online communication. If you have not reviewed that, we encourage you to review that and have some conversation for interns with your supervisors and supervisors of field instructors with your administrators. If your school has not obtained online consent for online counseling, it is strongly recommended that school social work interns direct all of their termination communication to the parent, who can in turn share that with their child. Again, it's really important. If you have a consent for counseling, that is very different from an online consent for counseling. And we would encourage you to review the NASW Code of Ethics. And also NASW has developed an online telehealth consent that we would encourage you to review. And we can certainly share that with you. probably is in our resource list, but if it isn't, we will make sure that we share that with you. When you think about confidentiality, it's important that when you communicate with parents that you share the summary of the process, of the progress in terms of their improvement, and not detailed content about the sessions. The issue of privacy versus confidentiality in online communication is pretty unclear. One article that I recently read from EdSurge suggests that it's really important to make sure that online tools do not violate students' privacy. And in the article, it really spoke to the fact that some young people might experience cyberbullying as a result of some of the online tools. And the second example that they talked about is that students may inadvertently, with showing their pictures online, share information about their living conditions that also can be used by other students in a negative manner. So again, it's a new arena, but it's an arena that we have to move in, but do be thoughtful and cautious in terms of the kind of tools that you use. So we want to talk now about some ideas around virtual termination. Because of COVID-19, the intern terminations with the students will be abrupt, but it's still really important to say goodbye. We know from termination that termination is an important part of the therapeutic process. So it's important to say goodbye. It's also important that you acknowledge and share the students' accomplishments and progress and their SEL skill development. But at the same time, we recognize that the online termination or the virtual termination, especially during the current health crisis, provides some opportunities for you to monitor the students' current progress. So, and his or her reaction to the current health crisis. So that might be something you can have some conversations with parents about. And also, if the student is having some particular concerns in this area, it certainly is something you want to share back with your field instructor so that they can do the necessary follow-up once you leave the school setting. I also want to talk about some of the challenges of online termination. And I'm sure there are others, but some that we've already identified is that if you don't have an online consent to interact with the child, you don't have the ability to really engage the child in terms of being reflective or in terms of assessing his or her own progress. In traditional termination, there's a lot of dialogue where the student is able to really assess and talk about his growth, his strengths, and that might not occur in the virtual termination. Another important challenge that I think is important that we raise is the issue of equity. When you find families that do not have access to technology in their homes, then it becomes critical in terms of how will you communicate. And even though there are perhaps ways that you can send information out, it doesn't provide an opportunity for dialogue between the intern and the parent of the family. So it's really important that you share students' growth, review the positive changes, provide suggestions on how to continue to use the skills that they have developed, and also provide tools and strategies for parents. Eric?
So you really have to figure out what your district allows and suggests. Use consent forms, calls when needed. In fact, this very morning, my morning was spent with having my interns put together an email for parents with an English and Spanish release to use Google Hangouts to meet with students using teleconference. Now, I understand that many districts aren't even entertaining that idea of teleconference, but for whatever reason, it's already been happening in our district with teachers that are on Google Classroom set up already and having assigned Google Hangouts times. Their only stipulation has been so far for the teachers to have two adults. But since we're talking about counseling and social work, it's a much more involved release that is being sent out via email for parents. So with permission, we're going to be attempting groups and individual sessions to do a more direct termination. But as we're going to be talking about shortly, there's other means in order to do a termination that's an alternative. In fact, one of the solutions that's been offered already is printing things and mailing things. So that might be the ultimate form of termination in some cases. So the virtual termination by interns with school communities, the closure, we gotta remember it's for you too. So developing a strategy to say goodbye is to the whole school community. General communication to staff is a way to do that, and we're gonna offer some specific wordings. And then considering a separate communication to your field instructor, I was going over that with my interns this morning on the specifics. So it's kind of like multi-rings, the outermost ring being the community. You want to have some way that's more general. And then as you get closer in those relationships and in the connection, that would be done differently. But then also, uniquely in this high school setting, we have graduating seniors, 18 years of age. And they will inevitably ask to become your Facebook friend. The short answer is no, but we can connect on LinkedIn, I think, is the appropriate response, and have that more of a unidirectional LinkedIn using APA guidelines for a minimum of a year to establish any different kind of acquaintance type relationship. And then I think APA has 5 years beyond that for more of a friendship. But I mean, all those things are specifically to not accidentally sabotage any work that you've done by avoiding the termination process.
Okay, so here are two letters, and we just put together some sample letters. One is to parent and student, and the second one is to the school staff. So again, this is a very abrupt termination. So it's important that even though we are all working virtually now, that we reach out to parents, and certainly this is only a guide that you can rework these letters any way you like, or it could be a more direct conversation with the parent. And then the second letter is to school staff. Generally when an intern leaves school, they are able to say goodbye to people. And so this is just a suggestion of maybe writing a letter back to the principal, field instructor, and staff. We as Eric said earlier, we encourage you to do a separate, more direct letter to your field instructor, because that is the person who has really guided you through this year. So be very thoughtful about that. It pays dividends going forward.
So I have another very specific example for what a termination letter might look like, or if it ends up being able to be said aloud. Before I go into that, I just want to acknowledge that the Zoom chat going on the right is very hearty, and I like it. And I think we got to keep those questions pouring out. But I see that also there's experts in this room with us. So if you have a quick answer to some of these questions, there's a lot of just very technical questions, I think, by interns. If you have those answers, feel free to respond to them, because this is going to be a lot of questions to navigate later. And I want to make sure if there's simple answers to these questions and someone has the information, go ahead and answer. So for this example that I have, I'm big on reflecting back on the social emotional state standards, since they're just kind of 3 areas, more of a self-reflective identification of emotion, the second one being more interpersonal, and the third being community and community service. What I'm suggesting is you open it up with something that starts out kind of in the more educator language. You or your child were or was working, because it's either directly to the parent or to the student, working on improving how to identify and manage his or her emotions and behavior. So that's the wording of 1A, that's standard. But as you make it a little more user friendly to, let's say, I'll shift down to the child, You showed awesome improvement in using feeling words to say how you feel. You used happy, mad, sad, and scared instead of getting in trouble for acting bad. I only had to remind you once of those words, instead of saying prompting. Good work. You'll go on to learn more social skills. So, that's just an idea of some wording, like how do we do termination if all we can do is send an email or a letter? Here's some ideas for you.
Okay, are we ready?
Yeah, so I think we can click to the next slide for Gigi and the fourth objective.
Okay.
Okay, and so some of my old students don't know me by Gigi. This is Gisela Grumbach.
Sorry about
Dr. Grumbach, Governor State University. Gigi is my nickname. All right, so here we'll turn our attention to thinking about some things you can consider for the job search and for interviewing virtually since we have the shelter-in-place orders, right? The point is that your job search does not have to be totally thwarted because of sheltering in place. So you might think about how you might apply online and make contact with different school districts that may be hiring, and then we'll maybe make some suggestions for a few other things. All right, so on this slide, you can see that there are several suggestions to help you prepare for the social work interview, the school social work interview virtually. So first of all, you need to develop a comprehensive resume and make sure you do that even prior to reaching out. But also, I think it's important to make sure you have someone else to read this or review it for you. Having an extra set of eyes on it is always recommended. And many of you can use your career services at the university where you attend. But it's also important for you to consider preparing in the same manner that you would for a face-to-face interview. So what does that mean? It means not becoming too relaxed because you're in your home setting, which is very personal, but keeping it at the professional level. So one thing that you might consider to help put you ahead is consider producing an e-portfolio for yourself, an electronic portfolio that might help you stand apart from other job candidates. Research information about the school where you want to apply for a job. Make sure you understand the school's mission, what things they focus on, what are their strengths and weaknesses, and in particular, if they've had any challenges, how does your skill set work in terms of trying to meet any of the challenges that they may be encountering right now. But also you might even think about some of the lessons that you've learned throughout this time of remaining flexible and during this time of the COVID-19 crisis. And then also make sure you take a look at your social media and make sure that it has appropriate content. Check it to make sure there's no inappropriate content there. So yes, it's your own personal, your own private space, but if they are able to connect you to connect in some way by your name to your social media web pages, your social media content, and if it's not appropriate, if it's not professional, it can cost you a job interview, it can cost you a job. So I know that some people think that it is something that is very personal, and it is. However, we do have a professional responsibility to maintain our professionalism even after hours. But consider using LinkedIn, and when you do, use it for professional postings only. I see now increasingly that people are becoming a little more politicized and using their LinkedIn for other things, but LinkedIn, if you use it for professional purposes, can work in your favor. I've had someone to reach out to me just by looking at my LinkedIn page and to see if I wanted to interview for a position at their university. So that can happen in ways that are unsolicited and ways that you don't necessarily expect. So on this page, it just lets you know in terms of preparing for the interview, how important it is to make sure that you have a clear understanding of the information that's needed, right? In terms of the interview date, making sure that you reaffirm that with the person who is scheduling that for you. If you're doing it in the same time zone, not a problem, but if you're thinking about moving somewhere else, make sure you have the knowledge that you need in terms of time zones and making sure that there's an understanding. understanding what kind of tool they may use and which virtual venue, as well as making sure that you have a good contact person to talk to or communicate with about any particular details you need. But also it's important, I think, to request whatever kind of information you might need, any details they can give you about the structure of the interview. But in addition to that, what you can see to the left, could you go back to that slide, please? What you see to the left is that you should really practice, right? So practice, practice, practice. My mother always said, practice makes perfect. She didn't coin the phrase, but of course she always said it. But so you have to practice the possible responses that you might have to any questions you can anticipate for the job interview. Make sure you practice with a trusted colleague or friend who can give you some really good feedback. Another thing is that you might either audio or video record yourself doing the practice interview so that you can see and make adjustments. How comfortable are you? How did you answer certain questions? You can make whatever adjustments are needed based on that. And then you need to anticipate some discussion points. They'll ask you some of your strengths and weaknesses. And so you need to be prepared to answer that. Some people will interview you and they'll do what's called situational based interviewing, where they may ask you to describe a situation where you had to handle a conflict, maybe within the school environment. So be prepared to think about things like that. And how do you talk about it, where it shows your strengths. And even if there was a lesson learned, how can you convey that in the most positive way? And when you do these things and you practice, it'll help with your confidence and make you more relaxed for the actual virtual interview. Next slide, please. All right. So also it's important to consider when you, during your interview, you need to think about some of these things. I'm sorry, hold on, I'm trying to find my notes here. Okay. So you need to think about who your actual potential employer is and what things they may be looking for. So you want to make sure that you do your homework, make sure that you're prepared and that you know about the school prior to interviewing, and that you understand a little bit about the kinds of services that they provide to individuals, groups, and school-wide. It's also important to formulate a list of questions that you might ask during the interview and even after. But with the questions that you prepare, do not list on that, especially for a first interview, anything about salary. You can ask maybe about benefits, but think about questions that point to things like, supervision, what's provided for you, what opportunities are there for professional development, those types of questions. So you also want to think about, can you go back to the other slide, please? You also want to think about the different approaches that you've used as an intern and maybe some lessons learned. What populations have you worked with? What skill set did you gain and experience? So you want to outline and think about things that you can talk about as it relates to your internship experience. Those lessons learned, things that you gained a bit of expertise on or extra or additional training on. And also talk about your supervisory needs and concerns for professional development, continued professional development. Okay, next slide. Okay, so here, you just want to make sure that while you're sheltering in place, if you have to do an interview, that you do it in the best possible way. You want to plan to make sure you have an appropriate place within your home where you can interview. And so by appropriate, what we mean is that you have no distractions or clutter in the background, that perhaps you're in a room that has a wall, maybe something with a nice picture on the back, but something that's not distracting. You want to make sure that you're free from any extraneous noises, things like that. So I don't know how many of you have children, have pets, have family members. Those are things that sometimes make it a little more difficult to negotiate. However, because you're sharing some space. However, you can keep your the mute button on until you need to speak, and that's one thing that may help, because we know that it can be challenging at times. Next slide. It's also important to think about the way that you want to present yourself even for that virtual interview. So you want to maintain your professional demeanor throughout the interview. So it's best practice to just dress up for the interview as you would as if you were in person. Make sure that you're well groomed and you want to maintain your professionalism throughout. That's just a quick reminder because I'm sure you all know how to do this already. Thank you.
Eric?
Okay, so as far as the survey goes, there's going to be a link up on the screen, and some of you have been asking about, is this presentation going to be available? That is our goal, to get this PowerPoint to you electronically, so that all these links are things that you can click on. But we are going to have a survey for supervisors or social workers, field instructors. We want you to fill those out so we can get some information on what you still need, what information you have to share, and then same with interns as well.
Can I just add to that, Eric? We also want to recognize, and there might be just social work practitioners out there, we ask that you would fill out the supervisor's survey also. These are some resources that we've listed for you. Certainly it's just resources that we pulled together that we thought might be helpful. I'm sure that there are others that you can add to that, and we encourage you to add this as we build this new practice. So I would like to kind of acknowledge some people who have really provided some ideas and support to us, and they're listed here on the final screen. And I also would like to acknowledge the IT and PR department at Jane Addams that really provided some support to us over the weekend. This has been a work of love. We have worked diligently over the last couple of days to pull this together. So I really would like to say thank you to Gisela and to Eric. We put in some long hours here, so we hope that this was an opportunity to at least begin a discussion about terminations for interns in schools.